Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 215, Secret Mission. If we need to match the exact number of people, why don't we just reduce it by 1? Mok Jae-eun spoke with a nonchalant smile, leaving not only OKGI but even Gonyong, the leader of the advanced team, unable to hide their bafflement. What the hell is up with this guy? Is he really the one sent by the society leader? How can he say such a thing so casually? Just then. Cuckoo. Hey mister. So if I kill this kid and take his spot, will that work? The demon-subduing monk Jia Jiamzhong tightened his grip around OKGI's neck and sneered. Suffocating with his face turning beet red, OKGI flailed about, desperately trying to pry off Jia Jiamzhong's hand to no avail. The gap in their martial arts was too wide for him to budge an inch. Kook. OKGI's eyes were about to roll back. Damn, I'm really going to die. Sensing that OKGI was on the verge of suffocating, Gonyong hastily tried to stop this. But before he could intervene, someone else stepped in. Adding one more person won't be an issue. So please stop. It was Yubong, one of the advanced team members. Irked by Yubong's effeminate tone and mannerisms despite his made-up face, Jia Jiamzhong raised an eyebrow. And who are you to say that, boy? Ho ho. I'm not exactly a boy. What? Are you saying you're some kind of wench then? I'm not a wench either. Anyway, now that I know you're a demon-subduing monk, I kindly ask that you release him. At Yubong's words, Jia Jiamzhong scoffed. That's not for you to decide. As he spoke, Jia Jiamzhong's gaze fell upon none other than Mok Jae-eun. Seeing this, Yubong's eyes sparkled. He had been observing and assessing the situation from the start. As a result, Yubong found it strange but learned that the youngest member who had yet to even reach his 20s, Mok Jae-eun, was the de facto leader of the rear team. That kid is the core of the rear team. He wasn't sure why they had chosen the member with the weakest martial arts as the leader, but if they were to submit here, they would continue to be pushed around. Pot. Yubong sprung into action, aiming to subdue Mok Jae-eun. If he could just bring him under control, the entire rear team would have no choice but to follow their lead. Especially that crazy demon-subduing monk. Papa Pack. Instantly reaching right in front of Mok Jae-eun, Yubong reached out to grab his neck. However, before his hand could even touch him, where do you think you're going? Chwack. Seop Chun's wind demon blade was already slicing towards Yubong's wrist. Yubong quickly bent his elbow and infused hidden force into it, skillfully deflecting the blade. Tang. The thin and light wind demon blade momentarily curved from the rebound. Pararar. The blade trembled wildly. The impact of the hidden force reached even the palm gripping the sword handle. Kook. Not missing that brief instant, Yubong kicked towards Seop Chun's abdomen. Pack. However, Seop Chun was not one to easily fall for such an attack. Instead, he lifted Yubong's kicking leg upward and Piak. He struck the opposite side of the curved wind demon blade with his fist, dissipating the hidden force. Using the rebound from lifting the leg, he lightly leaped and tilted his head back, easily dodging Yubong's roundhouse kick with his other leg. Pak. The roundhouse kick narrowly grazed Seop Chun's hair. Not missing a beat, Seop Chun executed the second stance of the folding blade technique, rotating butterfly warning with the wind demon blade that had its hidden force dissipated. Chwa 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 chwak. Huh. As the blade rotated in a wide trajectory towards his neck, Yubong hastily dodged with a fox-like movement using a mysterious lightness skill, hopping over it. Ta-ta-ta-ta-tack. What kind of lightness skill is that? His blade wielding is no ordinary feat. Seop Chun and Yubong, who had exchanged several attacks in a brief moment, marveled at each other's skills and distanced themselves by more than 4 steps. But there was another person surprised by their duel, Gonyong, the leader of the advanced team. He had thought himself the most outstanding in martial arts among the advanced team. However, he never expected Yubong, who was said to have spent nearly 2 years as a eunuch in the imperial palace, to possess such astonishing prowess. He was hiding his martial arts? Gonyong clicked his tongue inwardly. Just then, Yubong glanced at Seop Chun with a troubled expression. Breaking through this person seemed far from easy. It's a shame, but there's no other way. From his bosom he took out something and threw it towards Seop Chun like a concealed weapon. Sook. Naturally assuming it was a dart, Seop Chun swung his wind demon blade to deflect it. However, the moment the blade's edge sliced the object Yubong had thrown. Papapapak. Gunpowder. It was none other than gunpowder. As the gunpowder exploded, red and blue sparks flew, causing Seop Chun to momentarily lose sight, frantically swinging his blade to prevent Yubong from closing in. But Yubong's target wasn't him. It was Mok Jaeyoung. Amid the flying sparks, Yubong aimed to subdue the one he considered the weakest but the core of this group. However, there was a fact Yubong was unaware of. Resorting to underhanded tricks, I see. What? Pak. Huh. Mok Jaeyoung lightly deflected Yubong's hand that was reaching out to perform the golden silk hand technique, grabbed his face and smashed it straight into the ground. Kwong. Ak. Yubong, his head slammed against the floor, trembled in pain. With this single move, Yubong realized it. The strongest one among the rear team, no, among everyone present, was none other than this guy. To think I made such a mistake. It was a grave error on his part to consider this guy the weakest and attempt to subdue him without knowing that fact. Kyung. The sound of deflating lungs flowed from Yubong, but his consciousness didn't last long. Perhaps suffering a concussion, his eyes rolled back and he passed out, foaming at the mouth. Mok Jaeyoung released his hand from Yubong's face and spoke with a smile. Let's put an end to this pointless power struggle. I believe you've sufficiently realized that further attempts are meaningless, no? At Mok Jaeyoung's words, Gonyong, the leader of the advanced team, unwittingly swallowed his saliva and nodded his head vigorously. Inside the Guanyu shrine with lanterns lit, the attitude of the dejected advanced team trio was now shrunken, unlike before. But there was something that made them shrink even further. And that was Mong Muyak, Vice Commander of the Headquarters Direct Oversight. Seop Chun, Third Captain Commander of the Internal Affairs Headquarters. Mok Jaeyoung, Disciple of the Shadow Clan Master. Upon hearing their identities, the advanced team was stunned. Damn these crazy. There was also a request from that place. So they knew some high-level pinnacle stage grandmasters would be sent as the rear team through the communication talisman. However, they thought expendable pawns would be sent for this mission, considering its low success rate and potential dangers. But learning the identities of these individuals, the advanced team couldn't hide their astonishment. Wasn't the vice commander of the headquarters direct oversight the son of the vice leader? Moreover, a captain commander of the headquarters? That's the society leader's personal guards. These people couldn't be treated recklessly based on their status alone. Furthermore, these two belonged to the Five Tigers, considered the best among the Heaven and Earth Society's young pinnacle stage masters. On the other hand, the only one they learned about for the first time was Mok Jaeyoung. The Shadow Clan Master took on a disciple? A disciple of the Shadow Clan Master meant he was a direct successor of the executive. They had been dispatched for missions outside for as long as 2 years or at least nearly a year. As such, they weren't well informed about internal affairs during that time. Hearing that Mok Jaeyoung was the Shadow Clan Master's disciple, they couldn't help but be surprised. If he's a recently accepted disciple, why is he so powerful? Especially Yubong, who had been subdued by Mok Jaeyoung in a single move, felt that way even more. With this level of martial arts, it would be hard to believe even if he had learned under an executive of the Five Kings level, let alone a sect leader level executive. Moreover, everyone from the vice leader's son to the headquarters captain commander addresses him as their lord. Just what is his true identity? Could it be that being the Shadow Clan Master's disciple is merely a front, and he's actually the society leader's disciple? The mystery deepened further. In any case, thanks to the rear team revealing their identities, the advanced team could also discern 2 facts. The first was that this rear team included the successors of the 2 departments in charge of information and spies within the society. That likely meant they would utilize the spies embedded within the Imperial Palace. Second was, we absolutely must not fail. Dispatching such individuals who have a high chance of becoming major figures in the future on a secret mission meant that failure was not an option. It had to be accomplished no matter what. Realizing this, Mok Jaeyoung asked them, well then, can you tell us what our mission is now? Gonyong, the leader of the advanced team, answered while kneeling. Allow me to explain the mission. But before that, may I ask how much the rear team members are aware of? To that, Seop Chun replied. We know it involves infiltrating a certain location to abduct an imprisoned individual and bring them to the society. You were only told a rough outline. I presume it was to prevent information leaks until we reached the gathering point. It seems so. Then I will inform you of the mission. First and foremost, our destination is the capital, Kaifeng. As expected. At his words, Siap Chun nodded. He had already guessed as much when the gathering point was Anak Hanam province near Kaifeng. Of course, unlike Siap Chun, Mok Jiongun and Mong Muyak, who had already been briefed on the exact mission by the Shadow Clan master and vice leader, showed no particular reaction. On the other hand, Kaifeng, don't tell me this mission involves recklessly entering the imperial palace. Jia Jiamzhong, the demon-subduing monk who had pledged loyalty to Mok Jiongun but knew nothing, asked jokingly. To this, Ganyang nodded in affirmation. That's correct. What? The imperial palace? So we're really going to infiltrate the palace? Yes. Our mission is to enter the imperial palace and abduct an individual imprisoned in the underground golden jade of the palace. At his words, Jia Jiamzhong made a dumbfounded expression. He was quite surprised to learn they were from the Heaven and Earth Society, but he never expected the mission to be so bold as to infiltrate the imperial palace. Jia Jiamzhong clicked his tongue and spoke. They've completely lost their minds. Doing such a thing will brand us as traitors, no matter what they say about being untouchable. Even Jia Jiamzhong, known as a lunatic and one of the three lights of Shaolin, considered this an utterly insane act. The imperial palace wasn't simply a place where the emperor resided and conducted state affairs. It was also a place where the power of an entire nation was concentrated. Attempting to abduct someone from there was beyond unthinkable. It was virtually impossible. Traitors? No, they must have a death wish. Ganyang responded to his reaction, finding it absurd. Of course, that would be the outcome if we fail. However, we have sufficiently planned the operation, considering numerous variables. Seriously. Never in my life did I expect to hear about robbing the imperial palace. Jia Jiamzhong clicked his tongue again, still seemingly unwilling. Regardless of his reaction, Mok Jiongun asked. That's all well and good, but I assume we're not just barging into the palace. How are we going to enter, and what's the plan to abduct that person? The reason we hastily summoned you all to the gathering point is precisely because of the issue of entering the palace. In exactly 3 days the guard trials will be held. Guard trials. The guards, or Siwabu, 1, are the palace guards. But what exactly are the guard trials? Puzzled, Ganyang explained. The guard trials are essentially a promotion assessment conducted within the guards. A promotion assessment? What does that have to do with infiltrating the palace? It does. Because if you pass the guard trials and get promoted, you'll be elevated to the embroidered uniform guard. Ah. The embroidered uniform guards, too. Like other guards, they are also palace guards who protect the imperial palace. However, there is a crucial difference. The embroidered uniform guard serves as the emperor's personal bodyguards and a special agency. They even possess extra-legal powers as they act on behalf of the emperor to inspect the 6 ministries. And the embroidered uniform guard manages all the golden jade prisons within the imperial palace. So that's it. Now the picture was clear on how they planned to infiltrate the palace and abduct that person. Just then, Siap Chun nodded as if understanding, but soon furrowed his brows. Wait a minute. We're not even members of the guards, so how are we supposed to take the guard trials? Yubong answered that question instead of Ganyang. Ho. You're perceptive. Of course we have a plan for that. You have a plan? You have a plan? Yes, from now we will head to Kaifeng and meet a certain esteemed individual. And we will request their assistance. Who is this person? Someone with enough authority to get us into the guards. Puzzled, Yubong smiled and replied. It's Her Highness, the Imperial Concubine Co. Chapter 216, Secret Mission 3. In the inner court of the Imperial Palace, there were 87 women donning the robes of concubines. This meant that there were 87 women who had received the titles of Talented Maiden, Noble Consort, Imperial Consort, and Noble Imperial Consort. Among these numerous imperial concubines, there were 2 consorts who were the most favored by the emperor. One of them was none other than the noble imperial consort Xiao Yonghyo. The emperor's favor towards her was so immense that despite the presence of the empress's grown children, the 7-year-old child she bore became the crown prince. As a result, she became one of the 4 individuals wielding limitless power within the imperial palace. Gonyang, the leader of the advance team, spread out 4 fingers and spoke while folding them one by one. If we were to name the 4 individuals with the greatest power in the current imperial palace, they would be His Majesty the Emperor's younger brother, Prince Jiayong, the Grand Preceptor who also serves as the Supreme Commander of the Central Overseers among the 3 Excellencies, the powerful Minister Hang Yun, His Majesty's second prince, Prince Zhang, who was originally the most likely candidate for the throne, and noble imperial concubine Xiao, the mother of the current crown prince. He slowly listed them out because Mok Jiangun had mentioned being completely unaware of the power dynamics within the imperial palace. Having spent his time only in the mountains, Mok Jiangun had learned a lot through books but was not well versed in how the martial arts world or the current Central Plains operated. So, one of the 4 most powerful figures in the imperial palace is noble imperial concubine Xiao. That's correct. Then why would such a person help us? Mok Jiangun raised a question, finding it incomprehensible. He had heard that the relationship between the imperial palace and the martial arts world had improved significantly, but the non-aggression treaty remained unchanged, and only the righteous sects actively interacted with the palace. So why would noble imperial concubine Xiao, one of the powerful figures in the palace, assist the Heaven and Earth Society, which had even confronted the righteous sects in the past? As he pondered, Yubong spoke in a quiet voice as if revealing a secret. Because we were the ones who supported her from the time she was a noble consort until she became the current noble imperial concubine. The Heaven and Earth Society supported noble imperial concubine Xiao? Yes, that's right. Ho ho. It seemed their claim of having a plan was not an empty one. If noble imperial concubine Xiao had received support from the Heaven and Earth Society to reach her current position, it would be difficult for her to simply ignore their request for assistance. At that moment, the demon-subduing monk Jiajiam Zhang, who had been sipping alcohol from a gourd with a dissatisfied expression, spoke up. Humph. She might agree to a reasonable request, but will she really accept a request that could affect her own position? At his words, none of the advance team members denied it, remaining silent. Then Gonyang spoke. The demon-subduing monk is right about that. When people reach a high position, they tend to easily forget all the hardships they endured to get there. So there's a possibility of rejection? We won't deny that. The current noble imperial concubine Xiao is not the same as before. As the mother of the crown prince, she has risen to a position where it's difficult for us to exert pressure on her. When a concubine becomes the mother of the crown prince, the title imperial is added to her existing title of noble consort. From that point on, she essentially wields limitless power. In this regard, the Heaven and Earth Society found it not entirely pleasing that she, whom they had supported for a long time, had reached such a position. In a sense, she had escaped their control. It won't work unless there's a mutual benefit between both sides. That's right. That's why we need to meet noble imperial concubine Xiao in advance. Fortunately, with you all joining as the rear team this time, it aligns with her requirements. Requirements? So there have already been discussions. Zip Chun asked, puzzled. To that question Yubong answered. Yes. We can't abruptly demand that a powerful figure like the noble imperial concubine, who holds the highest position in the inner court, immediately comply with our request. Then what are those requirements? She requested that we send properly trained late-stage warriors, just like how the major and minor sects of the righteous faction do. At Yubong's answer, Mong Muyak clicked his tongue. Mok Jiangun then asked, "Why do you do that? She's not an ordinary woman indeed." Pardon? Asking the society to send properly trained late-stage warriors is no different from telling us to move openly in the light, not through spies or from the shadows. Siep Chun also expressed his astonishment. Even if she helps, she wants to prevent any situation that could harm her. It seems so. In the case of spies, their ties can be cut off if necessary. But if the society officially dispatches late-stage warriors, the situation becomes different. Not only is it difficult to sever ties if a problem arises, but it also leads to a situation where responsibility must be taken. What do you think? Chong Ryong asked Mok Jiangun. To this, Mok Jiangun chuckled and said, "She's a clever woman." It seems so. If we move officially, naturally, the one making the request is the one who needs to be mindful. Moreover, they'll have to take responsibility if something goes wrong. She's making sure of that. That's not all. Not all? Yes. Her hunger has been satisfied. Her hunger has been satisfied? Yes. Ah, so that's what you meant. Chang Ryong understood what Mok Jae-eun meant by those words. A hungry person may say desperate things due to their hunger, but once that hunger is satisfied, the situation changes. They no longer want to make desperate pleas or have a leash around their neck. Considering this, it's not a matter of whether she will readily accept the request or not now that she has gained power. Mok Jae-eun spoke up. She may have been raised by this side, but she's no longer a pawn that can be controlled as desired. Ganyang agreed with those words. That's why we need to appease her to some extent while obtaining what we want. That's the key to this mission. At Ganyang's remark, Yubong added with a smile. But you don't need to worry too much. Noble imperial concubine Seo, whom we have been observing, has not forgotten the help she received from the society. She simply wants to prevent anything that could negatively impact her and the crown prince, so if we can assure her of that, she will be of great assistance to us. Everyone nodded at these words. In any case, their purpose was not to do something to the imperial palace through noble imperial concubine Seo. They merely aimed to accomplish the mission assigned by the society. As everyone was coming to terms with this, Mok Jae-eun alternately glanced at Ganyang and Yubong from the advance team with a peculiar look in his eyes. However, he didn't say anything in particular. Having learned from the advance team how the secret mission would proceed, the rear team, who had not rested at all since arriving here, decided to take a break for about an hour. Exhausted, Seop Chun fell into a deep sleep, while Mong Muyak engaged in meditation. Jia Jiamjong spent his time sipping alcohol from a gourd, using the roasted deer meat prepared by the advance team as a snack. In a quiet place slightly away from the Guanyu shrine, Chang Ryong, who had come out of the wooden puppet for the first time in a while, was showing something to Mok Jae-eun while wielding her long pipe. It was none other than a sword technique. Watching this, Mok Jae-eun exclaimed in admiration. Ah! The sword technique Chang Ryong was demonstrating was the moon sword style. However, the moon sword style had changed. It had become more refined and flawless compared to the original moon sword style she had taught him. Moreover, the sword technique had evolved into a set of movements that incorporated much more complex variations, capable of deceiving and pressuring the opponent. After showcasing the evolved moon sword style, Chang Ryong asked, "What do you think? The sword technique has become flawless. Is that all? The variations have also increased, making it an even more troublesome sword technique to face." At those words, Chang Ryong smiled and nodded. "That's right. After observing that old man's sword technique on the ship, I realized what was lacking in the moon sword style. So, I took the opportunity to supplement it." "Excellent. You memorized everything, right?" "Yes." "Then forget the previous one." "Yes, of course." With an improved sword art available, there was no need to remember the flawed one. Chang Ryong put the long pipe in her mouth and spoke while puffing out smoke. "By the way, you also witnessed that old man's swordsmanship along with me. Haven't you realized anything?" "Realization? Yes. Did you not gain any insight after seeing that swordsmanship?" The swordsmanship the old man displayed on the ship was truly shocking. As a result, Chang Ryong observed it and filled the gaps in the moon sword style, refining the sword techniques to evolve it closer to perfection. Now she was confident that it could surpass his heaven sword style. If even she had gained such insights, it would be a lie if this fellow Mok Jae-eun claimed to have realized nothing after witnessing it. This guy's talent was at a level that even she couldn't fathom. She was curious about how that swordsmanship had approached him. At that moment, Mok Jae-eun drew his evil commandment sword. Srung. And with the sword, he assumed a stance she had never seen before. Puzzled, Chang Ryong asked, "What is that?" The stance Mok Jae-eun had assumed was neither the old man's nor her moon sword style. To her question, Mok Jae-eun replied, "Originally, the moon sword style required a total of 4 sword techniques for the first stance. But this time 2 more techniques were added, harmonizing 6 techniques." At those words, Chang Ryong smiled and said, "Yes. I originally thought 4 techniques were the most suitable and the limit for a single stance, but that was just my fixed mindset. If more techniques are needed, they can be incorporated to diversify the variations of the stance and compensate for weaknesses." She considered 6 techniques to be the most ideal. The current moon sword style was the result of such refinement. Yes. Seeing that, I realized there was no need to be bound by fixed ideas. Chang Ryong's eyes sparkled at those words. Don't tell me, you also refined the sword techniques like me? No. You know the moon sword style better, so there's no need for me to refine it. Then what? I just pondered what would be the most efficient and ideal sword technique for me. Wait, don't tell me. Is this guy saying he created his own sword technique? Creating a sword technique was by no means a simple task. It wasn't merely about swinging the sword, but required the harmony of sword techniques to manifest stances, the sword intent to infuse the sword with qi, and the most suitable breathing path to maximize the power of the stances. All 3 elements had to be in place. Reaching a level where this was possible was referred to as attaining the realm of a sword saint. Even I spent years refining the moon sword style with that fellow after overcoming the bottleneck. But no matter how impressive the swordsmanship he witnessed was, it was beyond common sense for someone who hadn't even learned martial arts for long to create his own sword technique. However, Suk. Mok Jaeung-un slowly began to move the evil commandment sword. As if drawing strokes with a brush, Mok Jaeung-un executed sword techniques in a completely different trajectory from the moon sword style. Twak. The first technique was simple. It was just a horizontal stroke, and the second technique was a vertical stroke. But as more techniques were added, the variations naturally became more prominent. The moon sword style consisted of a total of 24 techniques, and originally 4 sword techniques were combined for each stance. But now, with a total of 30 techniques, 6 sword techniques were combined for each stance to further enhance the variations. Twak. Twak. The sword techniques displayed by Mok Jaeung-un exceeded 10. Given the nature of the sword as a weapon, it was natural for thrusting and slashing to be harmonized. As a result, overlapping techniques were bound to appear. About half of the sword techniques shown by Mok Jaeung-un resembled those of the moon sword style. However, at some point the techniques began to differ. Twak. The trajectory of the sword extended to completely unexpected angles. Witnessing this, Chang Ryong couldn't help but feel puzzled. She got the impression that each and every sword technique Mok Jaeung-un demonstrated did not overlap in trajectory at all. There's no need to make them so different. It seemed that due to his lack of experience in this area, he was approaching the creation of sword techniques in an overly complicated manner. With such an approach, the stances would inevitably become difficult as well. The sword techniques needed to be combined to create stances, but excluding the initial 10 techniques, it looked daunting to figure out how to combine the remaining ones. Twak. Phew. In the end, Mok Jaeung-un had demonstrated a total of 24 sword techniques. Seeing this, Chang Ryong clicked her tongue and said, "There's no need to deliberately make the trajectories different. Creating sword techniques like that will ultimately result in overlapping useful techniques, and the rest will be discarded. No. I'll use all of them. You don't need to be greedy with something like this." Mok Jaeung-un. Is that so? Trying to make the trajectories completely non-overlapping is also being trapped in a fixed mindset. If you truly realize something, don't be bound by it. I'll keep that in mind. Are you ignoring my advice again? He's so stubborn. Chang Ryong thought there was no point in saying more. If he tried to combine the sword techniques he created like that, he would eventually realize that her words were right. At that moment, Mok Jaeung-un assumed the initial stance again. This will be the first stance. It was at that very instant. Kwach. Mok Jaeung-un linked the sword techniques and executed a stance. However, Chang Ryong's eyes trembled wildly as she watched this. What? The reason being, she was curious about which techniques he would combine to execute the stance. But the result unfolding from Mok Jaeung-un's hands completely overturned all her expectations. Chang Ryong was momentarily dumbfounded. She had naturally assumed that out of the 24 techniques, at most 4 to 6 would be combined. However, the combination of sword techniques Mok Jaeung-un was demonstrating now. He's harmonizing all 24 sword techniques into a single stance? It was a combination of techniques that completely defied conventional wisdom. 24 non-overlapping trajectories were unfolding at an incredible speed, forming a single stance. Kwach. It was a sword technique that seamlessly integrated offense and defense without any gaps. After executing the stance, Breath flowed from Mok Jaeongun's mouth. The hand gripping the sword trembled, as executing 24 techniques simultaneously had strained his muscles. Witnessing this, Chong Ryong was left speechless. When told not to be bound by fixed notions, he created a stance that defied common sense. This guy, he's really insane. Chapter 217, Craftsman 1. A single stance consisting of 24 sword techniques. Witnessing this, Chong Ryong was left speechless. When told not to be bound by fixed notions, he created a stance that defied common sense. Throughout her life and even in death, she had thought about the sword for so long, but she had never considered increasing the number of techniques in this manner. In the first place, it wasn't something that could be achieved simply by increasing the number of techniques. How? Phew. It seems it will take some time to get used to this. She was dumbfounded by Mok Jaeongun's nonchalant attitude. With each additional sword technique, the number of movements naturally increased, inevitably straining the muscles. Moreover, if a single stance was like this, performing 24 stances was equivalent to not only overexerting the body but pushing it to its limits. What a monstrous fellow. This sword technique was not something that could be executed in a short period of time. It was a sword technique that would be challenging to execute even after several years of training, yet this punk Mok Jaeongun visualized it in his mind and physically manifested it in a single attempt. Calling it innate talent was an understatement. Astonished, Chong Ryong finally managed to suppress her amazement and asked, "How did you come up with this?" "I'm not sure. When I saw the swordsmanship of that elder, I noticed that within its simplicity lay complexity. However, I felt that with my current abilities, I wouldn't be able to wield such a sword." The swordsmanship the old man had demonstrated became increasingly simple. Yet within that simplicity Mok Jaeongun sensed profound principles. At this point Mok Jaeongun realized that it was not something that could be achieved by merely imprinting it with the eyes and memorizing it. In that case, I thought if I were to manifest all the ideal trajectories to thoroughly slay an opponent, wouldn't it become a nearly flawless sword technique? Ha! At Mok Jaeongun's words, Chong Ryong clicked her tongue. They had witnessed the old man's swordsmanship together, so how could the results be so different? No, perhaps it was possible because it was him. In the first place, since he hadn't learned the sword for long, there were no limits to his imagination. I have no choice but to acknowledge it. Mok Jaeongun's sword talent had already surpassed her own. With him, reaching the pinnacle of swordsmanship that all swordsmen dreamed of might be possible. 2 days later. The imperial capital, Kaifeng. Upon arriving in Kaifeng, Mok Jaeongun's group couldn't help but express their sincere admiration. They knew it was called the center of the Central Plains and, being the imperial capital, it would naturally be prosperous. But its scale was incomparable to even the outer city of the Heaven and Earth Society, considered the largest among single forces. The outer city of the imperial capital seemed to stretch endlessly, and even reaching the outer walls, which could be seen in the distance, would likely take more than half an hour by carriage. As everyone marveled at the city, there was one individual who seemed restless with a darkened expression. It was the demon-subduing monk Jajimjong. Zip Chun asked, puzzled. "Are you feeling unwell? Your complexion has been poor since yesterday. Wait, are your hands trembling?" Jajimjong's hands were even shaking. Seeing this, Zip Chun expressed concern. However, Jajimjong shook his head and said, "We need to find it. Quickly." "Find what? Are you looking for a doctor?" "No. Help me find an inn or a tavern." Zip Chun stared intently at Jajimjong's face. Come to think of it, he had been complaining about running out of alcohol since yesterday afternoon. So, was he experiencing withdrawal symptoms from not drinking? "You're quite something." This level of addiction was almost severe. No matter how skilled he was, could his liver withstand drinking so much? Shaking his head, Zip Chun glanced at Gonyang, the leader of the advance team guiding them. After entering the city, Yubong, the eunuch of the imperial palace, had left midway. He said he would go ahead and prepare for the meeting with noble imperial concubine Seo. The place they were currently heading to was Hongbong Meat, the largest slaughterhouse in the capital city. The reason they were heading to the largest slaughterhouse was simple. There is a highly skilled craftsman there. It's huge. Mok Jaeongun remarked upon seeing the slaughterhouse. Typically, a slaughterhouse is divided into 4 areas. the cattle and pig pens, the meat storage, the slaughter area, and the vendor stalls. However, the scale of these 4 areas was much larger than an ordinary estate. Pointing to it, Ganyang from the advance team said, "There are 1,000 cattle and pigs inside. Naturally, it's operated on this scale." "I see. Since this place also supplies meat to the Imperial Palace, I've heard they only handle the highest quality. You'll understand once we go inside." With that, they entered through the main gate of the slaughterhouse. As they stepped inside, the smell of cattle and pig feces and the stench of blood assaulted their nostrils. It certainly seemed like a slaughterhouse. Buzzing noise. Inside the main gate there were vendor stalls with meat sorted by parts, and in front of them, a large crowd of customers had gathered. There are so many bodhisattvas obsessed with meat. Jajimjong clicked his tongue and spoke. Despite being a demon-subduing monk, he surprisingly refrained from eating meat even after leaving Shaolin. Therefore he seemed displeased with the slaughterhouse. With a puzzled expression, Seb Chun said to Ganyang, "Is there really a craftsman in a place like this?" No matter how he looked at it, this place was too conspicuous. Even if it's darkest under the lamp, it was too crowded. Moreover, if this place supplied meat even to the Imperial Palace, wouldn't officials frequently visit here? Could they really carry out such a task? That's correct. So don't worry too much. Seb Chun still seemed dissatisfied. Just then, among those near the vendor stalls, a hairy man noticed their group carrying weapons, unlike the other customers, and approached them. "My lords, what brings you here?" In response to his question, Ganyang took out a prepared token from his bosom and handed it over. Then he casually said, "We're here to select some good rind meat. May we take a look?" Upon receiving the token, the man examined it closely and then revealed his yellow teeth, saying, "If you're looking for rind, pork rind is the best when grilled." "Pork rind sounds good. We'd like to select the meat to be slaughtered. Is that all right?" "Why wouldn't it be? I'll guide you, so please follow me." With that, the hairy man pointed to a pavilion and took the lead to guide them. However, as Mok Jayangun was about to follow behind him, he suddenly paused. Noticing this, Mong Muyak, who was beside him, asked, "My lord, why are you hesitating?" Without answering the question, Mok Jayangun turned his head and looked towards the main gate. Rumbling noise. The sound of wheels rolling could be heard. Soon, the entire main gate opened, and individuals who appeared to be government slaves entered the square, pulling carts. However, Mok Jayangun's gaze was not on them but on the person walking at the very back of the cart procession with his hands behind his back. He was wearing a blue flying fish robe and a unique patterned mask. Behind him, 4 individuals wearing navy blue flying fish robes with their faces covered in cotton cloth were also following. They seemed to be officials, but all of them, they have cultivated martial arts. At Mok Jayangun's words, Mong Muyak frowned and said, "My lord, please turn your head and enter inside for now." At Mong Muyak's urging, Mok Jayangun turned his head and followed the group beyond the pavilion. As they moved away from the square, Mong Muyak spoke in a low voice. "What a coincidence. Why do you say that? The officials in flying fish robes earlier are from the embroidered uniform guards." "The embroidered uniform guards?" At these words, Mok Jayangun's eyes sparkled with interest. He seemed to understand why Mong Muyak called it a coincidence. The identity they were trying to infiltrate for their secret mission was none other than the embroidered uniform guards. So who would have thought they would encounter them by chance in a place like this? Mong Muyak clicked his tongue and said, "Yes, the embroidered uniform guards." "Aren't the embroidered uniform guards the Imperial Palace guards?" "That's right. It's strange. Not even the guard troops but the embroidered uniform guards in a place like this." "What? The embroidered uniform guards?" Seb Chun, who was walking ahead, interjected with a frown. Mong Muyak then said, "Shoo. Be quiet. Right now, in the vendor square of the slaughterhouse, the embroidered uniform guards." Before he could finish his sentence, Ganyang whispered, "You don't need to concern yourselves too much. The embroidered uniform guards personally inspects the meat that enters the inner palace since it's used for the meals of the imperial family." Handling food ingredients might seem trivial, but it wasn't. Food ingredients and medicinal herbs were not only consumed by palace residents and officials but also by the imperial family and even the emperor, so the imperial palace paid the utmost attention to their inspection. Assassination attempts through food ingredients and medicinal herbs had been carried out since ancient times, making it particularly important. I see. But do most of the embroidered uniform guards cultivate martial arts? Yes. Since the embroidered uniform guards are under the direct command of the emperor, I've heard that each of their martial arts is at least first-rate or above. Among those in high positions, there are quite a few who would be considered experts even in the martial arts world. What is the rank of the one wearing a blue official robe with a golden belt depicted with flying fish? In response to that question, Ganyang asked back with a somewhat surprised expression. Did you say a blue official robe with a golden belt? Yes. A blue official robe with a golden belt indicates a 1,000-men commander, a 5th-rank senior embroidered uniform guards. With that rank, he must be a significant figure even within the embroidered uniform guards. The organizational structure of the embroidered uniform guards' executive ranks is as follows. Lesser Banner, Sogi, Junior 7th rank. Chief Banner, Chongi, Senior 7th rank. Probationary 100-men Commander, Sabiko, Junior 6th rank. 100-men Commander, Biko, Senior 6th rank. Deputy 1,000-men Commander, Buchian Ho, Junior 5th rank. 1,000-men Commander, Chon Ho, Senior 5th rank. Pacification Commissioner, Yuxian Ho, Junior 4th rank. And Assistant Commander-in-Chief, Jin Musa, Senior 4th rank. Tel/N. Read more notes on the rankings after this chapter. If he's a significant figure, how skilled is he? In response to Sip Chun's question, Ganyang stroked his beard and replied. 1,000-men Commander, Chon Ho, of the 5th rank senior in the embroidered uniform guards would be an expert who has at least reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm. At least? The Imperial Palace's embroidered uniform guards is no ordinary force. Yes. Since they have been exchanging with the righteous sects and recruiting many experts, their level has become much higher than before. At Ganyang's words, Sip Chun grinned and said, Still, if the level of a 1,000-men commander is that high, if this friend or I join the embroidered uniform guards, we would receive a rank of at least Pacification Commissioner or above. Sip Chun and Mong Muyak were among the 5 Tigers, the highest-level pinnacle stage transformation realm warriors of the Heaven and Earth Society. With their martial arts approaching that of the executives, they were confident they could receive high ranks in the embroidered uniform guards. At Sip Chun's confidence, Mok Jiongun tilted his head and said, I wonder about that. Pardon? Why do you say that? That 1,000-men commander of the embroidered uniform guards we saw earlier, the one with the mask. What about the embroidered uniform guards? Just as Mok Jiongun was about to say something, he shook his head and said, Never mind. Suddenly stopping mid-sentence, Sip Chun couldn't help but feel uneasy. Let's go for now. He wanted to ask what Mok Jiongun was trying to say, but given his personality, it seemed unlikely he would answer. Curious, Chong Ryong asked. What were you trying to tell him? That masked 1,000-men commander from earlier. He had sealed some of his chi points. Sealed his chi points? Yes. Mok Jiongun could see the general flow of chi with his naked eyes without opening the power of the third eye in his right eye. In Mok Jiongun's eyes, the masked embroidered uniform guards 1,000-men commander had sealed 3 major chi points. So, based on the chi emanating from him, his level seemed to be at the pinnacle stage of peak realm, but if he unseals them, I don't think Sip Chun would be a match for him. Was he that skilled? Yes. For some unknown reason, that person was sealing his own chi points to conceal his true abilities. Mok Jiongun was about to mention this but decided not to, as the conversation would have become lengthy. But there was one more unusual thing. What is it? Through the gaps in the mask, I noticed that person's eyes were blue. Jinyui, or embroidered uniform guards ranking from highest to lowest. Zuishi, Commander-in-Chief, the highest-ranking official in the Jinyui, responsible for overseeing all operations and reporting directly to the emperor. Zhihui Tongji, Vice Commander-in-Chief, assisted the Commander-in-Chief in managing the Jinyui and assumed command in their absence. Zhihui Qianshi, Assistant Commander-in-Chief, aided the Commander-in-Chief and Vice Commander-in-Chief in their duties and handled specific tasks as assigned. Zhen Fushi, Pacification Commissioner, responsible for maintaining order and suppressing rebellions in the provinces. Qian Hu, Chili Arch, commanded a unit of approximately 1,000 men. Fu Qianhu, Deputy Chili Arch, assisted the Chiliarch in commanding the unit. Bai Hu, centurion, commanded a unit of approximately 100 men. Shi Bai Hu, probationary centurion, a trainee or candidate for the position of centurion. Zongqi, chief banner, commanded a banner which was a military unit that varied in size. Xiaoqi, lesser banner, assisted the chief banner in commanding the unit. Jiangjuan, general, a high-ranking military officer responsible for leading large formations of troops. Jiawei, captain, commanded smaller units within the Jinyue. Li Shi, strongman, physically strong individuals who served as bodyguards or enforcers. San Mumushi, participant in certain affairs, officials assigned to specific tasks or investigations. Xiaoling, drill master, responsible for training and drilling the troops. Chapter 218, Craftsman 2. Through the gaps in the mask, I noticed that person's eyes were blue. What? Blue eyes? Blue eyes. It refers to someone with blue irises while also signifying a person from the western regions. People from the western regions lived to the west of the Central Plains. Although there was a considerable distance between the vendor stalls in the square and the pavilion at the back behind the main gate, Mok Jiangun, who had reached the transformation realm and possessed more developed senses than ordinary people, noticed the blue eyes showing through the gaps in the mask. Are you certain? The eye area of the mask protrudes so it was dark inside and not very visible, but my eyes could see it. That's quite peculiar. This isn't Tibet or Xinjiang, so it's strange to have someone from the western regions as an imperial official. This was more than just a rare occurrence. Although there had been much openness and exchange with martial artists recently, the imperial palace was still more closed off and conservative than any other group. This was because the Han people prided themselves as the center of the Central Plains in this nation. They even arrested all those associated with the Baiwa religion, which originated from the western regions, accusing them of deceiving the world and the people, and exterminated their families. In the imperial palace of such a nation, employing someone from the western regions as an official, not even a slave, was quite extraordinary. There must be a reason for it. That's a carefree response. But the mere fact that someone from the western regions who has cultivated martial arts is in the imperial palace's embroidered uniform guards warrants caution. Try not to get entangled with them. I'll keep that in mind. In any case, their purpose here was singular. It was to abduct Fire Faith Order Holy Guardian, who was said to be imprisoned in the underground golden jade of the imperial palace. Regardless of their background or motives, it had nothing to do with him. As they followed the hairy man's guidance, pig pens emitting a strong odor of livestock feces came into view. The squealing sounds were deafening. The hairy man led them inside the pens without stopping. At this, the demon-subduing monk Jiajiamzhong muttered with a frown. Don't tell me we're really here to slaughter pigs? Mong Muyak shook his head and said to him. If you don't know anything, just follow along. So you're telling me to keep my mouth shut? Humph. Tsk tisk. Mong Muyak clicked his tongue in displeasure. As they walked through the pens, the hairy man stopped at an empty pen. He then used a fork to push aside the pile of straw there. Underneath, there was a wooden entrance. The hairy man grabbed the rusty shackle on the entrance and pulled. Screech. As the door opened, stairs leading underground were revealed. Seeing this, Seop Chun remarked with admiration. They sure made a place like this. Who would have imagined a secret underground passage hidden inside a pig pen filled with the stench of feces? The hairy man grinned and pointed downwards with his thumb. Follow me. With that, they descended the stairs. After descending to a depth equivalent to 2 floors, a cavity about 10 feet wide came into view. Inside the cavity, which was lit by lanterns, there were various tools and a workspace. The hairy man pointed to a reception chair on one side of the workshop and said, The craftsman will be here soon, so please wait a moment. Ta-ta-ta-ta-tack. Before he could finish his sentence, someone hurriedly descended the stairs and rushed towards the hairy man. Judging by the blood-stained leather apron he was wearing, he seemed to be a worker from the slaughterhouse. Brother Song, a word with you. At his words, the hairy man asked for Mok Jiangun's group's understanding. Please wait a moment. Ganyang nodded, indicating not to mind it. The worker and the hairy man then moved a short distance away from them and engaged in a whispered conversation. Although they spoke in low voices, Mok Jiangun, whose hearing had become more developed as his martial arts improved, could hear their conversation clearly. We're in trouble. What's the trouble? The person who requested the production last time seems to have been an official. What? So we need to have these people wait for a while. At their whispers, Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed. It seemed they had encountered some problem. Just then the hairy man approached them, bowed his head in apology and said, I apologize for the inconvenience, but could you please wait here for a moment? The craftsman may be a little late due to an urgent delivery. Why would that be a problem? We'll wait then. Gonyang spoke in an understanding tone. In any case, they were in the position of making a request, so they couldn't complain. As the slaughterhouse workers who had asked for their understanding went outside, Gonyang glanced at Mok Jae-un and the rear team and said, It won't take long. At this, the demon-subduing monk Jajiamjong interjected. Who knows? Will it really be so? Pardon? I heard those guys talking earlier about some officials. Didn't you hear? It seemed Jajiamjong had also overheard their conversation. Gonyang asked back. Officials? Yeah. The Lord mentioned seeing the embroidered uniform guards earlier. Isn't that who they were referring to? At his words, Gonyang stroked his chin, looking troubled. The embroidered uniform guards had simply come to inspect the meat to be delivered to the imperial palace and take it. But he couldn't fathom what this was about. Zeb Chun said to him, If something happens to the craftsman, won't it hinder our mission? Didn't you say this person is the only one who can create the human skin masks within the time frame? That's right. The purpose of their visit was to commission the creation of human skin masks. Human skin masks refer to leather masks made using human skin or pig hide that are indistinguishable from real human faces. The owner of Hongbong Meat here was known for slaughtering livestock on the surface, but in the underworld he had a high reputation for crafting extremely sophisticated human skin masks. Of course, not many in the martial arts world were aware of this. But even so, as the demon-subduing monk said, if those officials are from the embroidered uniform guards, it's best for us not to intervene. What a coincidence on this day of all days. Damn it. It was truly an uncanny coincidence. Since they needed to infiltrate the embroidered uniform guards, it was best not to cause friction with them right away. If they stirred up trouble and it affected the guard trials, everything would be for naught. Let's wait for now. It's not like we have an alternative plan. At Mok Jae-un's words, everyone nodded in agreement. About an hour passed. Just then the sound of the secret underground door opening came from above, and someone descended. They thought it might be the craftsman, but it wasn't. The one who came down was the hairy man who had guided them. However, unlike before, the hairy man's complexion and expression didn't look good. Gonyang spoke. Is the craftsman not here yet? I apologize for the wait, but I'm afraid I have even more regrettable news for you. What do you mean? The craftsman is currently unable to accept any requests. Unable to accept requests? Gonyang raised his voice. The hairy man then bowed his head and spoke in a groveling tone. I'm sorry, but I cannot disclose the circumstances. So I kindly ask the guests to please leave. What? You're telling us to leave now? Gonyang looked dumbfounded and abruptly stood up from his seat. Startled, the hairy man flinched and took half a step back. Gonyang pressed him. Are you violating the rule of accepting requests from those who bring the token? Moreover, didn't we wait here despite arriving first, considering your circumstances? I'm aware of that. However, we truly cannot accept any requests at the moment. Even if you threaten my life. At that moment, Mok Jae-un spoke up. I smell blood. At his words, everyone looked at him in surprise. Mok Jae-un pointed at the hairy man's hand with his index finger and said, That hand. The hairy man furrowed his brows at those words. What was he saying about smelling blood from this distance? He wasn't a dog or anything. The hairy man waved his hands and said, Naturally, there's the smell of blood since our job is slaughtering. No. It's not the smell of cattle or pig blood but human blood. It's not just that. Judging by the scent of dried purple orchids and large knotweed mixed with the blood, it seems you hastily applied a hemostatic. At these words, the hairy man's eyes widened. He was already skeptical when Mok Jae-un mentioned the smell of blood, but now he was mentioning purple orchids and large knotweed, leaving him perplexed. Both herbs were hemostatics used in slaughterhouses. Occasionally, Cuts occurred during the slaughter work and those herbs were used at such times. But he had smelled it even though it was mixed with the scent of blood? The startled hairy man spoke in a trembling voice. How did you know that? I've studied herbs a little. A little. At those words, everyone looked at Mok Jiongun with surprise. Was it possible to do this by simply studying herbs a little? Even in this underground room, the smell of leather and metal was mixed, making it difficult to detect other scents. Yet Mok Jiongun had distinguished the scent of blood and herbs from the hairy man's hand, which was astonishing. Just then the hairy man suddenly approached Mok Jiongun, knelt down and said, "Did you perhaps know medicine as well?" Medicine? As Mok Jiongun asked back, the hairy man, who had even lowered his head, pleaded in a desperate voice. "Please help us." A building located between the pig and cattle pens. Ugh. Inside a room in the building, a middle-aged man in his 50s wearing a shaggy leather outfit was suffering in agony with a pale face. That was because both of his wrists had been severed. The slaughterhouse workers beside him had tightly wrapped cloth above his severed wrists to stop the bleeding, but the blood didn't seem to clot easily. One of the workers said to the man who was in pain, "Master, please endure a little longer. The doctor will arrive soon." But, my daughter. Young Master Emo has gone to bring the young miss back immediately. Hurry and bring my daughter first, Ugh. Please calm down. It will be serious if you continue like this. The workers tried to dissuade him as he attempted to get up despite his agony from his severed wrists. Just then the door opened and 6 men led by the hairy man rushed into the room. They were Mok Jiongun's group. One of the workers abruptly stood up and shouted, "No, Brother Song. What is the meaning of this? Why did you bring the guests here?" The hairy man pointed to the middle-aged man who was referred to as the master and said to Mok Jiongun, "The master's severed wrists are not clotting. We have called for a doctor, but something might happen before then. Please help us." Wait, what is going on here? Gonyong was dumbfounded as he witnessed this. What on earth had happened for the master's arms to be severed like that? Seeing this, Sip Chun and Mong Muyak simultaneously looked at Mok Jiongun. That was because, although they didn't know the details, Mok Jiongun had previously used his techniques to reattach Mong Muyak's severed arm. So they glanced at him with a glimmer of hope. Step. At that moment Mok Jiongun approached the master. The workers beside him tried to block the way with a guarded look in their eyes. The hairy man called Brother Song scolded them. "Don't interfere. He's here to help." At those words the hesitant workers stepped aside. Mok Jiongun then approached the suffering master and quickly pressed the acupuncture points on both of his arms. Tat-tat-tat-tack. As he pressed the hemostatic points, the blood seeping from the cloth-wrapped severed area noticeably stopped. The master, who had been in agony, looked at Mok Jiongun with a surprised expression. Who are you? Let's talk about that later. Where are the severed hands?" Mok Jiongun looked around and asked. That was because he couldn't see the master's severed hands. Instead of the master, one of the workers beside him slammed the table and spoke in an angry voice. Bang! Those bastards took the master's severed hands wrapped in leather. They took the severed hands? Mok Jiongun showed a troubled expression at those words. Just then the master, who seemed to be able to endure a bit after the bleeding had stopped, spoke with difficulty. "Guests, I don't know who you are, but please leave. I'm in no condition to accept any requests or help anyone." "Who are the ones that took the severed hands? What's the point of asking that? If you want to save your hands, it's best to tell me." At Mok Jiongun's words, the master and the workers showed incomprehensible expressions. How could they possibly save the already severed hands? As they were puzzled, the hairy man, referred to as Brother Song, spoke to Mok Jiongun with a troubled look. "The ones who severed the master's hands and took them away are from the embroidered uniform guards. I apologize, but even if you follow them, you won't be able to retrieve the hands." "Damn it!" Siep Chun cursed at the hairy man's words. As he suspected, it was the embroidered uniform guards. If the embroidered uniform guards, the Imperial Palace guards, had severed the hands of the master, no, the craftsman who was supposed to make the human skin masks, there was no way to do anything about it right away. Just then Mok Jiongun turned around. "My lord." Mong Muyak called out to him in confusion. Mok Jiongun shook his head and said, "There's no other way. I'll be back soon, so please wait here." "Pardon?" But my lord. Swish. Before he could finish his sentence, Mok Jiongun's figure dispersed like smoke and disappeared from their sight. The master and the workers' eyes widened at the sight. Although Hong Bong Meat was a large-scale slaughterhouse, it was located on the southwestern outskirts of the city due to the nature of slaughter work. The outskirts were surrounded by forests, making it relatively less frequented by people. Rumble rumble. A procession of carts loaded with meat was proceeding there, and at the very back, there was a carriage and 4 embroidered uniform guards in navy blue flying fish robes riding horses side by side as if escorting it. Among them, an embroidered uniform guards with droopy eyebrows riding on the right side clicked his tongue and said, "What a foolish wench." The embroidered uniform guards with a beard riding next to him said, "Indeed. No matter how much they are her father's hands, it's quite daring of her to chase after us and make a fuss. She has no sense." Understandable. What child wouldn't be distraught over their parents' plight? Well, that's true. But I wonder how the 1,000-men commander will deal with that wench. His Excellency personally ordered us to bring the severed hands, so it's unlikely he'll return them. As he spoke, the bearded embroidered uniform guards glanced at the carriage. Inside that carriage were the 1,000-men commander and that wench. Just then, the carriage that had been following the cart procession suddenly came to a halt. Wondering what was happening, the embroidered uniform guards steered their horses to the side to look at the front of the cart procession. There, someone with their face covered in black cloth stood with their hands behind their back. The embroidered uniform guards with droopy eyebrows, dumbfounded, rode his horse to the front of the cart procession, drew his sword and shouted, "Srung! Who dares to block the way of the procession?" In response to his shout, the person with the covered face chuckled and said, "How foolish of you. What? If I were going to tell you, why would I have covered my face? You insolent bastard." Pat. Enraged, the embroidered uniform guards with droopy eyebrows immediately leaped off his horse and swung his sword with fierce momentum towards the person with the covered face. Hover. Clang. His blade was blocked by the index finger of the person with the covered face. Having his blade blocked by a mere finger, the embroidered uniform guards with droopy eyebrows was so surprised that he couldn't hide his bewilderment. An expert.